open our time in a word of prayer, and we will get started. Father, thank you so much that we can be here. You've saved us. You've redeemed us. You've made us your children, and we will be with you forever. Thank you also for the opportunity that we can look at your word. All of your scriptures are inspired, and that includes the parts that include geography and details, and even about the holy, set-apart city of Jerusalem. And so we pray that as we look at that, it'll be encouraging and challenging and grow us in our understanding of your word. We thank you for that. In your name, amen. Okay, so we're going to look at Jerusalem today. This is a modern-day picture of Jerusalem, Temple Mount. Lamentations 2. And if you know the context book of Lamentations, Lamentations was written at probably one of the lowest points of all of Israel's history, right? They disobeyed God. They're being, Northern Kingdom has already been taken into exile. The Southern Kingdom, they know, it's imminent. They're about to be taken into exile. That's where that, great Lamentations 3, the loving kindness, the faithfulness of our Lord is new every morning. We're going to sing Grace Thy Faithfulness later on in our service. But then in Lamentations 2, Jeremiah, who's the author of Lamentations, the prophet, he said, Jerusalem, the city of which they said, the perfection of beauty, a joy to all the earth. So Jerusalem is a very significant place, a very significant city. What page are you on your notes? And so you can make sure you get there. What? 36, 37, right in there. Okay, so that's where we're gonna be looking at. Now I forget where it is. Somewhere I have a whole listing of the dates for Jerusalem. I'm not going to go through those in detail. What page is that on? 41 on page 41. Just list down. It starts all the way from the early Bronze Age, which is about 2500 BC. So pre-Abraham. That's pre-Abraham, between Abraham and Adam and Eve. You know that the book of Genesis covers more time than all of the rest of the biblical books, and even to our time period put together, right? So the book of Genesis. So, but Jerusalem was active in that time. It wasn't called Jerusalem, and you can see all the details related to that, all the way down to the various ages and King David conquering. But I'm going to look at it. I have a little bit more colorful. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I guess you can see it. Let me get my little highlighter, wherever it is there, laser pointer. Okay, so early on, the Egyptian New Kingdom was in control of this area of Jerusalem. It wasn't called Jerusalem at that time. It was called Jebus, or some people believe it was called Salem. Melchizedek was king of what? Salem. Okay, and Abraham, when he goes to offer Isaac on the altar, he goes to what mountain? Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount, which is where 1,000 years later the Temple Mount is going to be located. You can't go there today, but it's right there, and it's Temple Mount Moriah. So it was first controlled by the Egyptians, then the Jebusites controlled it until about big round time period of 1000 BC. A key king. Who is the king that conquered Jerusalem for Israel? King David. Okay, the man after God's own heart, the warrior king. About a real big time frame, 1000 BC, and we have the United Monarchy where they control that. Then in about 922, there's a division of the kingdom, and the northern kingdom does not have Jerusalem. The southern kingdom, made up of Judah and Benjamin, has Jerusalem, and they are the ones that are controlled. Then we have the Neo-Assyrian Empire and the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and so the Assyrians and the Babylonians ended up conquering Jerusalem. Babylonians primarily in three destructions, 605, 597, and 586 BC, they conquer and they take control of Jerusalem. Then it goes through a series of empires, from all the way to the Greeks and ultimately the Romans. If you look at this color here, orange means like pagans, okay? Orange means pagans controlled the city of Jerusalem. Blue means the Jews controlled Jerusalem. Red means Christians, quote unquote, I'll use that in quotes, Christians controlled Jerusalem. And then green, who is that? Muslims. The Muslims controlling Jerusalem. So you can see, just by looking at the pure color, that actually the Muslim world controlled it for a long time. even though this is a longer time frame in here. And so then it ultimately, there's a few revolts. We have the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is the Hasmonean revolt. So the Jews revolt underneath the Hasmoneans, and they take some control of it. And about 140 BC, roughly, they get control of it. They lose it. The Romans come in and take it over again. Herod, you can see Herod right here. Herod the Great is in control of it. And then the Romans ultimately in 70, right about in here, about 70 AD, the Romans conquer, and they're still in control, but they're going to conquer Jerusalem and really ultimately destroy it, burn it to the ground, melt it, basically. But then the Jews in the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is about 130 AD, the Jews are able to throw them off, and they're able to control it again. Then we have the Byzantine Empire, which I guess you could call a form of Christianity, to take control of this. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can see a huge time frame of Muslims there in the green that control Jerusalem. In here, this right here, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, would be the Crusades, when Christians from England, primarily in Europe, they're going to go and rescue Jerusalem from the pagans. And so they, if you want to read some very sad stories, read about the Crusades. I mean, they were brutal. I mean, not true Christianity. And there's a lot of folklore, obviously, and movies made about all that, but that's what this was all about. They were able to get control here a little bit later. And Muslims controlled a long time, all the way up until what's called the British Mandate, where Britain was, after the Turkish Empire is thrown off, the Britons controlled it in the British Mandate in the early 20th century. And then ultimately, it's going to be, then it's shared, quote unquote, but now today it would be controlled. In 1967, the Jews got control of Jerusalem. 48, they had their country. They didn't have control of Jerusalem up until 67. That's why today, if you went to, they have called Day of Jerusalem. We happen to be there on the Day of Jerusalem. It's one of their greatest, it probably is the greatest holiday. I mean, there were people marching and not marching, just singing at the top of their lungs till 3 in the morning. I mean, they sang all night. And Jewish people, because they're so excited because they had Jerusalem. They had the temple. They had Jerusalem. Now they've given control of the Temple Mount to a group from Jordan, because they know it's just too complicated. It's too politically untenable. So that's real quick picture, okay? Real quick picture. Let's get some background on that. I don't know if you have some questions on that. I want to walk through the different stages of Jerusalem. One of the things you keep remember about Jerusalem's built on 5 or 6 hills. Well, one of those is Mount Moriah, right? So there's 5 or 6 hills. Now, we're in the Northwest, okay? When we think of, they call them mountains. When you think of mountains, I mean, you're thinking of, Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, 14,000. Well, no, we're not talking that stage at all, okay? But if you're living on a flat desert, anything over 10 feet, anything over, 500 feet, it's considered a mountain. And so there were 5 main mountains, and there's all kinds of valleys, like you've heard of the Kidron Valley, which Christ is going to walk across. You've heard of the Hinnom Valley. I mean, there's a number of valleys, and there's 5 mountains that Jerusalem is built on. Here's a view of some of those mountains. One of the most well-known ones is what? The Mount of Olives. And it's a little mountain. I mean, we just use the name, we forget, it's a little mountain. That's where it was. Mount of Olives, Mount Scopus, another one of the mountains, Mount Zion, which is also Mount Moriah. This is the western hill, which was not populated, we'll see, during the times of the early Old Testament. This would be what we would call the city of David, the Ophel, O-P-H-E-L. And then this picture is taken from another mountain that you're standing upon. So we just think of, and there's these valleys, like right here, this right here is the Kidron Valley. So Christ would have had the Last Supper up in here, and then he would have walked across the Kidron Valley, which is right here, and he would have gone up onto the Mount of Olives. Now, there weren't all these homes at that time. Let me give you just kind of real quick overview, so we can just, I have this in your notes, like a number of pages back, because I'm going to walk through different stages of Jerusalem. It's helpful for you to know, kind of a big picture of the history. I just put this together as kind of a big picture of the history. I mean, these are the main, in white is the historical books of the Bible, but it starts in creation, 6 to 10,000 BC. Then we have the captivity. Then we have the Exodus, which is in 1446. 1846 is when they went into Egypt. 1446 BC is when they come out of Egypt. We have the conquest of Canaan right here in 1406. Joshua takes about 7 years for that conquest, from 1406 to about 1400. Then we have the time period of the Judges, which is about 350 years. Book of Ruth is happens during the time of the book of Judges. Judges is a horrible time, because what's the key phrase of the book of Judges? Every man did what was right in his own eyes. They weren't following God. It's a cycle of sin, judgment, a deliverer. Sin, judgment, deliverer. Sin, judgment, deliverer. And when I bring all this up, is they don't have control of Jerusalem at this time, They don't have control. Even though Joshua back here in this time period, 1406 to 1400, he broke the back of the military power structures in the land of Israel, and yet they didn't go into every single location, so there's still a lot of Canaanites. And one of the key places where there are Canaanites is what? Jerusalem, called Jebus. They don't have control of Jerusalem all the time. Even though they've been in the land for hundreds of years, they don't have control of Jerusalem. Which you're like, really? I thought they had control of Jerusalem all the time. No. Not actually, relatively speaking, they had control of Jerusalem a very, very small amount of time. Then you have Saul here in about 1050, who was the people's choice for the king. The people rejected Samuel. Ultimately, God says to Samuel, what? They rejected me. And so they choose a king. And they choose a king that was tall, he was dark, he looked the part, but he did not have a heart for God. And it's not until David, and basically 1000 BC, 1010 BC, that David becomes the king. He's God's choice. Because remember, don't you love it in 2 Samuel chapter 17 or 16 when it's time to pick the new king, and Samuel goes to Jesse's house, and he says, okay, call your sons. Jesse says, okay, calls all the sons. They come in, and they go out, and Samuel goes, yeah, sure, that's the guy. Eli, goes down all, and he's like, and it gets to the end, it's like, nope, this isn't any of them. So he's like, there's got to be somebody else. Oh yeah, there's this guy that's out in he's out in the pasture taking care of the sheep. Well, we're not sitting down to eat until he comes. So he comes, and they call, and he's the man. Immediately, Samuel anoints him, and he becomes the king. And the king ultimately points ahead to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, which will be Christ. But he's the one. He is the one through Joab, his commander, who takes Jerusalem. He controls Jerusalem. We're going to look at why it was so significant. And then we have a time period here. David, his son Solomon, we had the division of the kingdom about 930 into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom is the one that has Jerusalem. Why? Because it's in Judah. It's really actually on the border, but they have control of that, which became an issue so that the northern kingdom created several capitals. They have several of them, but one of the main ones was Samaria or Shechem. You've heard of Samaria, the woman of Samaria. Old Testament, that was the capital of the northern kingdom. They create several other altars where they can offer where they can worship God, but not in the right way, right? God rejects it. And so we have the division of the kingdom here. And then in 722, the northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians. And then here we have the Babylonians in 606, 597, and 586. You can see Jerusalem's been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar in 606. Many believe probably like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're taken from Israel. They were very likely they were part of the royal household, and we don't know exactly, but they were very significant, and so they're taken to Babylon. But then Jerusalem's conquered. It's conquered. The walls are breached, but that's it. And then the people God. What does God say to the people of Israel at the time? You need to submit, right? Why? Because Nebuchadnezzar was from the hand of God, right? He is God's judgment, so you just need to submit to that. Take your spanking kind of thing. But they don't. They continue to push back. So he comes back in 597, conquers a little more, and then in 586 he comes back and says, okay, I am done with you guys. And he levels everything, levels the walls, destroys the temple. The most significant, we're going to look at that later on next Sunday, the most significant structure that has ever been built on planet Earth, the temple, built by Solomon. And he destroys it, and he takes all the southern kingdom in exile to Babylon. Zerubbabel returns in 536. It's the first return. And what's the first thing they build? You would think, what would be the first thing you would build if you're concerned about people attacking you? What would you build first? The walls, right? Nope, they don't. They're not going to build the walls for almost 100 years. They would build the temple first. And God says, build the temple. And so they build the temple. With Zechariah talks about that. There's lots of crying for joy, but also the people that were alive 70 years before when the temple was destroyed say, this is nothing like the temple that we had. It's nothing like it. Yes, we're glad we have a place we can worship God. It's nothing like it. And so the temple's rebuilt. Nehemiah returns in 444 and rebuilds the walls at that time, and that's we have the book of Ezra related to that, and then the Old Testament closes in 424. Okay, then the rest of the history, we will get the then the Romans ultimately are going to go down through. We go down through the Assyrians, we go down through the Greeks, the Romans, and then to the time of Christ, first century, the Romans will be control of Jerusalem. Let's look first. Let's look at the first instance. Well, one of the first instances where we see the city of Jerusalem. This is Genesis 22. I alluded to this when Abraham, the great man of faith, called by God in Genesis chapter 12. And yet it's not until he's called, he's promised that he's going to be the father of a great nation. I mean, right? That's from the beginning. I mean, Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17. We have the Abrahamic covenant, and God said, "You're going to be a father of a nation." What's the problem? He doesn't have any children, okay? Now he has some kind of children, Ishmael and things, which are a whole other reason why you see all those green spots on related to controlling Jerusalem. But he has a son, and they call him Laughter because he's 100 years old, and there's still a little boy that's born into their home and brings them great joy. Great. Can you imagine? I mean, you've waited, he waited, from the promise, probably about 25 years he's waited for this promise. The promise is finally fulfilled, and he has this son. He's probably, at this time, many believe that he was probably a mid to a later teenager. He's not a little boy. He's not a 5-year-old. Not at all. He's probably older, many scholars would believe. And so, but what does God say that he's supposed to do with this son of the promise? Kill him. And he doesn't just say kill him. He says, take him up and offer him as a burnt offering. Kill him. Offer him as a burnt offering to me. And what does it say here? Genesis 22:2. He said, God speaking, take now your son. And I want to make sure you know which son this is. Yeah, I'll take Ishmael. No, not Ishmael. Take now your son, your only son, whom you love. I mean, he's just driving it in. Isaac. Go to the land, and here we see it, the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. And so this is what it is, Mount Moriah. And that whole situation happens where he goes right to the point. He's about to take the knife down, and the angel of the Lord stops him, and he says, now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And then God provides a ram that he sacrifices there. But all that happens where? It happens here on Mount Moriah, on Jerusalem. I mean, that's where Jerusalem is going to be located. And then we'll see, I want to see some other key points. 2 Samuel 24, verse 16. Fast forward, lots of years, okay? We're roughly about 980, 990 BC. So about over 500 years after Abraham, 600 after Abraham. It's then the angel of the Lord. This is actually Christ, who is the destroying angel. When the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem, the Lord Yahweh relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, what's happened? David numbered the people, right? David numbered the people, and it specifically says because he was trusting in his own resources, he was trusting in his people rather than trusting in God. And so there's a great plague where thousands and thousands of people are killed. And the Lord says, it's enough. Now relax your hand. And the angel of the Lord, and that's a technical term in the Old Testament, always used to refer to the second person of the Trinity, Christ. Christ was doing this. Was by the threshing floor of Araunah, also called Ornan in the book of Chronicles, a little different name, same person. The what? The Jebusite. What's Jebusite? Jebus. Jerusalem. He's from Jerusalem. We read these little things, we miss them. No, he was. Why? What does that tell you? He's not a Jew. He's not a Jew, because the Jebusites were the ones who controlled Jerusalem. By this time, David's conquered Jerusalem, okay? He's conquered Jerusalem, and yet there are still some Jebusites in the land, and this man owned this particular area. And that's their whole thing where David ends up buying it, right? And he said, I'll give it to you. He said, no, I'm not going to take anything from the Lord that cost me nothing. And so he actually buys it, which just becomes what? It becomes the Temple Mount. This right here. This becomes the Temple Mount for Israel. And then 2 Chronicles 3:1. Then Solomon, I'm kind of fast forwarding through this. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. Where? Just one minute. It's not just in Jerusalem. It's where? On Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. When did he appear to his father David? When he had that great sin, when David confessed his sin and offers to the Lord at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Okay, so you see that there's a continuity here. I'm just trying to draw it together for you so you can see that this isn't just like, oh, hey, where do you want to locate the capital? You know, like United States Charter, where do you want to have the capital? Yeah, let's do it in D.C. Yeah, we want it in a swamp. It actually literally is a swamp. That's not just a political term. No, we don't just randomly decide where we want. No, there's specific. God wants it to be here in Jerusalem. Here's just a kind of a picture of the mountains. I just have this for the mountains. Here's the city of David. We're looking north, straight north. Here's the city of David. It's called the Ophel, which was which Solomon built. Here's what Solomon will build as the Temple Mount. But I wanted you to see kind of the terrain here. You can see the various mountains. You can see here's the Kidron Valley. Christ, after he has the Last Supper, he walks over the Kidron Valley. He walks over onto the Mount of Olives up in this area. The Temple Mount, which is Mount Moriah, is going to be right up on here. The Jordan River, here's the Jordan River Valley, not that far. Way up here we see Mount Hermon, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Okay? I'm going to back up now. I want to talk now about this time period right in here as far as, and I'm going to look through, and this is not in it's kind of your manual, because I want to look at the Jebusite city, okay, of Jerusalem, okay? And this is an artist rendition of what they think that, Jebusite looked for. This is about 2000 BC, roughly, about 2000 BC. The Jebusites are one of the Amorite tribes. The Jebusites are descendants of the Amorites. You've heard the name Amorites in your Bible. The Jebusites were underneath the Amorites, which had been cursed by God in Genesis 15. These people were cursed by God. They're Canaanites, okay? These people are Canaanites. They're pagans. They're not followers of the one true God. Joshua defeats the Amorites. You see numerous times, even during Moses' time when he's still alive, there were times when they fought against the Amorites. The Jebusites were of the Amorites. Joshua defeats the Amorites. And remember at Gibeon, they have a great battle at Gibeon. The Jebusites were a part of that. Okay, they're part of that great coalition, I guess you'd say, that ultimately Joshua defeats in the central part of Israel. This is a very relatively recent, I would say in the last 15 years, discovery. This is actually, if you go up in here, it's actually where they believe David's palace. Palace was a very relative word compared to his son's palace, which is phenomenal. But where David's place where he lived, but underneath it are these right here, and this is like a citadel that would have guarded the water. It's related to the Gihon Spring, because the most critical thing about Jerusalem, one of the most critical things is it has access to water. Really, really critical. But during the time of the Jebusites, this is what they would have built. They had built fortifications. This is the spring citadel is what this is called. They discovered it, I think about 20 years ago, because it's right over the Gihon Spring, and what's called Warren Shaft and Hezekiah's Tunnel later. But it's right there because it was so significant. This is kind of a looking down at it. If you were to go down that way, you'd hit the Gihon Spring. And so that's the Jebusites. It was relatively small. It was smaller than the city of David, like that picture that I showed you. But it's going to be conquered ultimately. So this is that time frame right in here, and then we get to right here, King David. Okay, right here, toward the beginning of David's reign. And we're going to have David's ultimately going to conquer it. David's kingdom starts in about 1010 BC. If you just want a big number, just remember 1000 BC. It's 10 years off, but that's fine. 1000 BC is when David reigned in Israel. He reigns for 40 years, and ultimately he's initially when Saul is killed for 7 years. It tells you that the division was even existent then. The southern tribe tribes actually made him king for 7 years. And there's some different attempts, Ishbosheth and Abner and Joab. There's all this intrigue. But 7 years into it, he becomes the king of the whole thing. Okay? The whole land. He becomes the king of the whole land. He's consolidated power in Judah. But what does he need? He needs a place. He needs a place. Okay, so here's just kind of map-wise, one of the questions you need to ask. So David, 7 years into his reign, he's only been reigning for over the southern 2 tribes, and then 7 years into it, he gets the whole thing. Okay, it can't be he had been reigning from this place down here in Hebron, okay, which is in the center of Judah. And David was from the tribe of Judah, right? He's been reigning here. This is where his kingship was. It's here in Hebron. But they need a place. They need a place that this is going to be the center of where he rules after he's been made king of all Israel. So the question is why did he choose Jerusalem? Hebron was where he was initially, but there is great rivalry. Let me give you some reasons why he chooses Jerusalem, why he can't stay in Hebron. One of the key things is Jerusalem it's in the tribe of Judah, but it's right on the edge. It's right on the border. And so because of that, Jerusalem is in neutral territory. Now, what about our country? Okay, where's our capital? Where's the capital of the United States? What is it? What is the capital of our country? What is it? Washington, D.C., okay? What state is it in? None. The Washington, D.C. is not in a state. It's in a district called the District of Columbia, right? I don't know what that means, but it's not a state. That's the whole point. In other words, it's neutral. You got the 50 states, and then you have Washington, D.C. Our capital is separate. It's neutral. So it doesn't have a more of a power for any of the particular states. Same issue here, that it's in neutral territory because there's lots of conflict. I mean, did you read the book of Judges lately? There's lots of conflict between the tribes. You think we have struggles between our states? I mean, they're killing each other, cutting people up, they're mailing them around to each other. It's a disaster. And so there's lots and lots and lots of rivalry. And so David knows he needs a neutral place. He can't rule from Hebron, which is, down in here. He needs a place it's going to be neutral. He could have been accused of preferring Judah, which is his home tribe, right? I mean, his home tribe, he's from Judah. And if he keeps it in Hebron, it's like, Judah's going to be this. No, he knows he has to have a neutral place so he can rule the whole territory. So Jerusalem was perfect. It was perfect place to be. Another... this will show it actually. So these are the approximate boundaries, just in big picture. When David comes to 10,004. So here's the what we would later call the northern kingdom. David rules this area right here in the first 7 years of his reign. Okay, from 1010 to 1003, David rules this particular area. He takes control of the whole thing. And so Jebus, this city called Jebus, which has yet to be conquered, it's still in control of the Jebusites, but it's the perfect location because it's neutral. It's a neutral place. There's another reason, okay, very significant reason, defensible terrain. And if you fast forward to all the different things that Israel's going to go through, if you lived at this time, you wanted to place your city on a place that was defensible. You're thinking ahead. Hey, this is nice and flat. Let's be here. Yeah, you're going to last about 10 years because the first person that comes along, they will destroy you. And so Jerusalem was very, very defensible. Here it is. I mean, this is just kind of a topographical map of it. So here's Jebus, the city of David, which would later be called the city of David. This is what was populated at the time. It's on the top of kind of the ridge of a little mountain. Then you have the Kidron Valley here, the Central Valley, which is also called later called the Tyropenian Valley, and then the Hinnom Valley is going to come through here. And so it was very, very defensible. In other words, for you to attack, it would be very difficult to attack from the east, very difficult to attack from the south, very difficult to attack from the west. The only place was in this narrow area where you would have to attack from the north, which you could create fortifications there. And ultimately, this was the only weak point. So comparatively, it was a very, very safe place to be. And so no doubt David looks at the terrain. He's like, this is where I want to be. What kind of king was David? He's a warrior king, right? Solomon was a peaceful king. David is a warrior king. He was a fighting man. He killed hundreds of people personally with his own hands, and he was a warrior king himself. So he was thinking as a general, I got to have a place that's defensible. Okay? Yeah, Larry.
What is the approximate elevation change from the bottom of the Kidron Valley to Jebusi?
What's the approximate elevation change from the bottom of the Kidron Valley or the Hinnom Valley or the Typenian Valley to the top of Jebus? It's very different because now it's about 60 or 70 feet higher than it would have been at that time because Jerusalem has been destroyed so many times and they scraped off the rubble, so it's about 60 or 70 feet higher. So I don't know, maybe 150 feet. I don't know, I'm just guessing. 150 feet. So it's not. Now you think that's not very much. Well, at that time, they don't have airplanes. They don't have helicopters. They don't have, it's very limited warfare. And so that was very significant. And also it was quite steep. It was quite steep, so it was very helpful. If you could reinforce it with glissades and different things, it was very, very defensible. So that's a key reason, number two. Number three, transportation routes. I've already talked to you about this. Very key. Jebus was central. It had some good transportation routes. The main, do you know what this one was called right through here? It's on the bottom right of the page. It's called the Way of the Patriarchs. The Way of the Patriarchs goes right through, kind of the ridge route. It goes right through Jerusalem. Why do you need that? Why do you need that thinking militarily? Why do you need good roads? Yeah. There we go, Alex, to transport troops. So there's a problem in some place in your kingdom. You got to be able to get troops there really fast. And so Jerusalem was excellent for that. It had great transportation. Fourth, but probably the most important, is water. This is the most significant thing. Why? Because, let's say you have a great fort. Let's say you make a great fort. No one can get into it. But what else do you need? What are people going to do back at that time? What do they do? Put you under siege, right? Just put you under siege. We'll wait you out. If it takes a couple of years, we'll do that. And so you need to have access to water. Food you can save. Water, it's not going to last. You're going to run out of water. And so it was a critical issue. Siege warfare was the key way. This is actually from the model of Jerusalem. It's scale. And this is just a model of it. So you can see here, this is first century Israel, but we'll see the Gihon Springs are right in this area here that ultimately, the key thing that Jerusalem has, it has the Gihon Springs, which was a water it was a spring. It free flowed all throughout the year. They estimate at least it could have, just by itself, it could have had a population of at least 2,500 people, which at that time doesn't seem big now, but it was very significant then. Could easily have survived on the water from the Gihon Spring. Now, there's different things you're going to have to do, and we're going to see that related, but it had a very natural supply of water, so it's just a great asset to that. So that's going to be the way that David's going to conquer that. So we're at let's say we're about 990 something when he's going to conquer Jerusalem. We don't know the exact date of it, but it's after he's taken control of the whole thing, maybe 1003, something like that BC. So David decides, we're going to take Jebus. It's not called Jerusalem yet. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, and they said to David, now this is the Jebusites talking, you just try it, buddy. You shall not come in here. The blind and the lame will turn you away. We don't even need we're going to get our handicap. They're going to fight you off. We are so secure in this location, you will never defeat us. And it's kind of like the talk before the big game today, right? This is what the different teams are talking to each other. That's what they're doing here. You can't enter here. Nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion. That is the city of David. He captures it. Now, ultimately, why did he capture it? God, right? God enables David because God wants his people to be in Jerusalem, right? That's the center. That's where it's going to all come from. But there's some very practical reasons why. David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, they're in control of it, let him reach the lame and the blind. He's alluding to what? the smack talk that they've just said to him. They call us lame, they called us blind. Okay, let's see how it goes. But it's also related to probably the route that he takes. Who are hated by David's soul through the water tunnel, because probably they think this is where they would have gathered around. Therefore they say, the blind or lame shall not come into the house. So David lived in the stronghold and called the city of David, and David built all around it from the Milo and upward. So David is absolutely undeterred by the mockery of the Jebusites, and he is able to get in through the Gihon Spring and what's later been called Warren Shaft. Now some of this is later on. We're going to look at kind of how Hezekiah develops. But you see this fortification here. This fortification was developed around the Gihon Spring, and somehow David knows they've got to have water somewhere, right? He's been living in En-Gedi. He knows they've got to have access to water. There's got to be a spring somewhere. So somehow they find access to that, and not he personally, Joab actually is able to climb up the shaft, and this is a horizontal tunnel. I've walked down this, but they're able to come in through. This is before Hezekiah's tunnel. They were able to come in through the Gihon Spring. They climb up the shaft, because see, the shaft was dug down to the spring many, many years earlier by the Jebusites. Why? Because you would lower your bucket. You would walk down here from the city. You would lower your bucket, down through maybe 100 feet down, and your bucket would get the water. You'd pull your bucket up and get the water, and you'd walk back up to Jerusalem. Well, Joab and his men, they are able, and they're not even guarding this. Why? Because they think it's so secure. One, they're not sure, they don't know they found it. And two, it's just, no one's going to do that, right? No. I mean, these are the special ops of special ops, and that's what they do. Joab, they climb up this, and they didn't have all the gizmos and gears. They just climbed up, mano a mano. They climb up, and there's a group of them that come through, and they kill people right there, and they're able to open the gates to the city. David and his men are waiting at the gates. So they open the gates of the city, and David and the soldiers from Israel flood in, and they take over the city, and it becomes the city of David at that point. Yeah, Sharon.
David was raised right there in Bethlehem.
Yes, exactly.
Not too far away.
But I'm very familiar.
I'm familiar with a lot of that.
Yeah, he's from Bethlehem. Bethlehem's, maybe 6 miles away? Yeah, I never thought about that. That's a great observation. He would have been familiar. Someone knows. They don't.
Out in the hills.
He would have known. Keep in mind, the Israelites were in control of the whole thing. The Jebusites had control of the city. So there had to be interactions. He very possibly could have been in there as a child. I mean, they didn't not let anybody in. They just know when their soldiers come, you don't let them in. So yes, he could have been very familiar with that as well. Absolutely. Okay, we already saw that one. So here's the city at David's time, okay? And this is, so he's built it up. He's there for 40 years. He builds it up, and in this area, now, well, I'll just go through it in order. Mount Moriah is the name of the hilltop north of the city of David. It's part of the same eastern hill of Jerusalem, which David built his city. This hill was first mentioned by Abraham in Genesis 22. So this is Mount Moriah. No one's living up there, okay? No one's living on Mount Moriah. Okay, who owns this? Who owns this when David first controls the city? Araunah the Jebusite, right? I mean, they took it from the Jebusites. Araunah controlled this. He owned it. David buys it from him, and later it will become the Temple Mount. But that's not where the city is. The city is built here. Why? Because the water is here. This is where the Gihon Spring is. This is where these fortifications are right here. The Gihon Spring is right here, and so that's why you have these fortifications down here. And this is where the city develops. Not until later, under Solomon, when he puts up the Temple Mount. We'll see that in a moment. Yeah, Becky.
Mount Zion, Mount Moriah.
Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, same thing. Yeah, Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, the same thing. Top of Mount Moriah, also called, what structure is there now? Dome of the Rock. Dome of the Rock, the big gold thing? That's where it is. It's right here on Mount Moriah. This was Araunah's threshing floor. Number of gates around the city. This is the Kidron Valley right here. Christ would have walked across the Kidron Valley. The Mount of Olives is up in this area. I mean, these are the towers that are built to get the water. Okay, so that's the city of David. From about 1003 to about 970 is when David would have had control of that. Any questions about the city of David as far as his taking control of it, him being in that area?
You probably said it and I missed it, but when did they call it Jerusalem first?
Well, that passage I just read calls it Jerusalem. So it's during David. Basically, David,
When it was called.
David, yeah, it's really going to be called Jerusalem from then on. Now, there's many times earlier to that where it's called Jerusalem, because that's what it's going to be called, so it's referred as that, so you know where it is. But during the Jebusites, it was called Jebus. Sometimes people believe it was called Salem as well. Melchizedek was king of Salem, which is this area, so many believe it was also called Salem before the Jebusites took control of it. Yeah, Larry.
Another reason did David know that God wanted Jerusalem to be the center?
Yes.
So that would be another reason.
Yes, yes, that's a good point. Another reason, the fifth most important reason, because God had said this is where it's supposed to be. Absolutely. Okay, so then we have David from about 1003 is when he gets control of that to 970, and Solomon, his son, the son of Bathsheba, becomes the king. Okay, and what is David? What is toward the end of his life? What is so much on David's heart to do? He wants to build a house for God, right? He wants to build a house for God because why? God has blessed him. He's given him all these things and blessed him amazingly. And so he says, I just want to, and yet what does God say?
You're a man of war.
You're a man of war. You have blood on your hands. And so you can't build the house. But he doesn't give up very easily, right? He says, okay, I'm going to prefab it. So he collects everything. Well, he doesn't collect everything, most of it, because Solomon's going to collect more. But David, he collects all, unbelievable. It's kind of like, it's like a prefab house. You got all the parts that are right there. David, because it's on his heart. He wants to build a house for God. And so he does it. He gathers everything so that when it comes time for Solomon has to take care of some initial things, but then he builds the temple. Yeah.
But in the same place where he's talking to God about wanting to build a house, God says, but I will build a house for you.
Right, and that's a different,
That's the Davidic covenant.
In 2 Samuel 7, he wants to build a house for God, and then a physical house, and then God says, I will build a house for you, and that's not a physical house, it's a household where he's going to ultimately it's going to go down to who? The Messiah, Christ. So he's going to do something far more significant than build a physical house for God, which eventually will be destroyed. He will be the ancestor of a household that will never end, because ultimately will culminate in Christ. And so Solomon, in 970, becomes the king. And you can see David, this area right here, David, that was where the Davidic city of Jerusalem ended, right in here. And then Solomon builds this house. And it's right here in this area right here. I'm trying to think if I have it labeled a little better. Yeah, there we go. I do have it a little better. Okay, so here's the city of David, right in this area right here. Solomon builds his temple right here, this right here on the northern part, and this is now on what? Mount Moriah. He builds the temple on Mount Moriah, and truly, we're going to look at the temple in next week or the week after. It was the greatest structure, human-built structure ever built. Phenomenal. But he builds it there. And then Solomon after that, how long did it take Solomon to build the temple? 7 years. It took him 7 years to build the temple. But then he builds a palace. How long did it take him to build his palace? 13 years to build his palace. Now, David had already done the hard work, right? So he has all the stuff. He doesn't have to gather it. But it takes him, can you imagine what his palace was? Absolutely phenomenal. Read the book of Ecclesiastes. It talks about all the riches and everything that he was surrounded with. That's what it was. It was absolutely amazing. And so you have Solomon's palace. And then you have what's called the Ophel. It's not awful. It's Ophel. It's like connection between the Temple Mount, Solomon's palace, and then the city of David. It connects it, so that you have to have what? You got to have walls to protect everyone. And there was a special ascent that would take them up to this area. This is the Kidron Valley, as I mentioned, that Christ later will have walked across, which David would have walked on a lot. This is what's called the Western Hill, which during the time of Hezekiah, later, and also during the time of Christ, it will be highly populated, the Western Hill. 2 Chronicles 3:1, then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David, and the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So Solomon builds on Mount Moriah. He builds this amazing structure. It's basically the permanent tabernacle. Up to that point, time of David, they worshipped in a tent, right? We'll look at that next week. It was a tabernacle, but now they have a structure that is we would say worthy of God, even though Solomon will say that the heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this temple which I have built. He acknowledged this is nothing, God. You are so far past this. And then he took 13 years and he built he builds his own house, which was a while. It was significant. Now he's building all kinds of other things. What else is he building? What else is Solomon building? It wasn't good. What? He built temples, places for his foreign wives. Remember, he has 300 wives with 700 concubines, and many of those were from foreign countries. And it specifically says they drew his heart away from God. He did not have a heart that was fully following after God. And because of that, what happens? Because of that, the kingdom is split. Not in his lifetime, because God honors his father's David. It specifically says God honors his father's commitment to God, and so he doesn't tear away the kingdom from him during his lifetime, but right after, when he dies, Jeroboam takes the 10 northern tribes away from Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and they become a totally separate kingdom. And then we have the division of the kingdom, and we have a number of different things. In the northern kingdom, they have their own capital, Samaria, Shechem. Jerusalem still remains the southern capital. So then I'm just going to kind of fast forward down to the time, because these are kind of the key key points. We have during the time of Hezekiah, very, very significant. Now, just to kind of get an idea, what's the city of David? Here's the city of David right here, this little area right here. Here's the city of David. This is Solomon, the Temple Mount, Solomon's palace. But then you can see this massive area right here that's expanded. Why do you think that massive area expanded at this point after the division of the kingdom? What happened? 930? Well, in the scriptures it says that Rehoboam builds two altars to worship God. He thinks they're worshiping God, but it's not right? To worship God, and it specifically says all the Levites come from the northern kingdom, because they were supposed to be sprinkled all throughout all the tribes, right? Levites didn't have any allotment. They're supposed to be sprinkled through all the tribes. All the Levites come down to the southern kingdom. And who else? It also specifically says, not just Levites, anyone whose heart wanted to follow God, they moved. They're like, we're not staying here in the northern kingdom. It's a disaster. And they come down. So what happens? You have a major expansion, right? And so starting at this point, at the division of the kingdom in 930, there's going to be lots of building in Jerusalem, and it's expanded. And here's during the time of Hezekiah. So when the Sennacherib is about to attack, Sennacherib has gone all the way through Lachish and the rest of Israel. They've destroyed everything, and all they have to do left and now is to conquer Jerusalem. This is what it would have been. When they're saying, we're going to destroy you, we're going to put you under siege, we're going to destroy you, this is what it would have looked like. Far bigger than the city of David, far bigger than the city of Solomon. It was enclosed by walls. 2 Chronicles 32, and after these acts of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah, besieged the fortified cities, and thought to break into them for themselves. Now when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and they intended to make war on Jerusalem. Now today, when there's a war starts, it goes fast, right? Literally speed of sound, some of it. We got jets and everything. Well, that time it was a lot slower. It could take several years for them to get to you, but they're coming, right? Sennacherib's coming. Because they literally said they would do signs by smoke signals, literally, to show, and they would have every day. But then they say, that one's no longer, there's no longer anything from Lachish. They must have been destroyed. So Sennacherib's getting closer, closer, closer. And then he's right there. And so, but they know he's coming. They know, Hezekiah knows that he's coming. So what does Hezekiah do? He appoints military officers over the people. He gathers them in the square at the city gate. He's encouraging them, saying, be strong, courageous. Do not fear or be dismayed because of the king of Assyria. Who's he talking about? Sennacherib. I mean, he's like the big gun on the planet. I mean, he has all the forces. He's conquered everyone. Don't be afraid of him. Nor because of all the horde. It's a horde. It's a horde that's with him. Why? Here's the key. For the one with us is greater than the one with him. Isn't that awesome? I mean, he really, because we're gonna look at some of the practical things that he does, but this is the key thing that he does, and what he trusts God. He says, no, we serve the King of Kings. We serve the Lord of Lords. Yeah, we're like, birds caught in a cage. We're gonna practically speaking, we should lose, and yet we are trusting in the one true God. Reminiscent of King David when he was a young man and he fights against Goliath, and he specifically says, you come at me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the living God. And so same thing here. What Hezekiah does. He starts with what? We need to trust God. We need to trust God. But he does some real practical things too. He appoints soldiers, but then the most critical thing is he digs what's called Hezekiah's tunnel. This is the entrance to Hezekiah's tunnel, and 2 Chronicles 32:30, it was Hezekiah. Check, testing, good? Yeah, get those away. So, it was Hezekiah who stopped the upper outlet of the waters of the Gihon and directed them to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all he did. Why? Because he's super smart? No. I purposely showed you that first verse. Why? Because he trusted God. That's the key. Hezekiah trusted God, but he also wore a seatbelt, okay? He also took practical means that God gave him things to do. And so he digs this tunnel. And this is an amazing, today, this is considered one of the most amazing engineering feats. These guys don't have any of the modern technology. I mean, they have. And it's dug from two directions, okay? It's not just one direction. This is dug from two directions. This is Hezekiah's tunnel, and you can see here's the city. Remember, this is during the time of Hezekiah, so this is the city of David. It's kind of cut away here. Here's Solomon's palace. Here is the Temple Mount, and then here's the western side. Well, Hezekiah, here's the Gihon Spring. So they dig this tunnel. They did this amazing tunnel. I think it's like 1,500 meters. I mean, it's a yard. It's a ways. They dig this tunnel to bring, why? What's the key? Bring the water inside the walls, so that when Sennacherib attacks, we have a continual, just an ongoing access to water. And it's not straight at all, okay? It's, you're going to go back and forth a lot. Actually, I think I do have a picture. This is when we went through it. So this is Hezekiah built this back in, it's kind of claustrophobic. It's kind of weirds you out. And there's water. It's water. The water's about this deep. It'll get almost up to your waist. But this is what they did. Can you imagine? They really dug this. They really did. Hezekiah and his men dug this to bring water into Jerusalem. You can see the water's running there, and it would probably do a city of about 3,000 people or so. So, Hezekiah's tunnel. I remember the first time we went through this back in 1986 6. And that, back then, now it's very commercialized. I mean, you can go, literally, we found this little kid, and do you know where it is? And he knew where it was, and so he had the key, and we found someone had the key. We weren't sure that they had the key to the other end to unlock us, to get us out. So that was like, let's go on. But I remember we went through with some college-age people, and the guy was a really, really big guy. I mean, he was big. We're partway through, he says, I'm not sure I'm going to make it through, because it was tight, but he made it through. He was fine. But Hezekiah builds this tunnel, which is amazing, that enables them to have water in there. Okay? So this is here we go. 2 Chronicles 32. And he, Hezekiah, took courage. He rebuilt all the wall that had been broken down, erected towers on it, and built another outside the wall, and strengthened it in Milo in the city of David, and made weapons and shields in great number. I'm just showing you, he didn't just trust God. He worked hard. His people got up early. They stayed late. They made weapons. They organized themselves in military might. They're doing things, and they built walls. There's a place, and I mean, I've been right. It's right there. This is called the Broad Wall, because what he did was he said, you know what? We can't defend everything. And so he literally tore down parts of the city and built a broad wall. It's about 21 feet wide. So it was very strategic to protect them. And you can see this today. I mean, it's right there. This is literally right in the middle. It just kind of, there's the broad wall. Hezekiah built that. Yeah. 7th century BC, he built that. That's what it was. Because he was really wanting to be thoughtful and be prepared for that. Okay? Jerusalem time of Hezekiah. Okay, then we go down through, we go Hezekiah, the Babylonians come in 586, 606 they destroy the walls, 586 they conquer everything. But then the time of Nehemiah. Nehemiah returns in 444 BC. They've already rebuilt the temple, and he rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. Now you can see, look at this picture here. I like this. This is from that ESV Bible Atlas. I mean, great picture. Or if you have an ESV study Bible, it's in there as well. But you can see these are all shambles, right? Because it's been destroyed. It's very, very small. Far fewer people are going to be there in 5th century BC than were there in the time of Hezekiah, because they've been exiled, right? And all of them didn't come back. Yeah.
So I know, and seeing all these pictures, and I have a huge question. I don't understand why they didn't simply build the wall.
Okay, why didn't they simply build the wall around the Gihon Springs?
Like years before. Why haven't all the walls been?
Yeah, why didn't they build the walls around the Gihon Spring? Well, they did. They did. Keep in mind, okay, remember I said last week that when you have a spring comes out what? At the bottom, and you want to build the city at the top, okay? And so it's the bottom of the valley, okay? So it's very indefensible down here. So there was major fortification around. Like today, in the last 15 years, they've done major archaeology about it was fortified. And so they did. They built that. David built that. But still, it was more susceptible because it's the bottom. It's the bottom of the hill. That's why. It's not at the top. A spring doesn't come out at the top of the mountain. A spring comes out at the bottom of the mountain. That's why they did that. And that's why he wants to bring it inside the city walls. It wasn't as easy just to move the walls. Well, they already did move the walls, but it's not very protectable. Defensible, I guess is the right word for that. Okay? So during the time of Nehemiah. So this has all been destroyed. So he just goes back to the Ophel, which is the city of David, and he includes also the Temple Mount, although doesn't have the same temple, because Zechariah, they rebuilt the temple, but it's not the same. But that's where the walls were. And basically, what are the walls at this time? They're rubble. They're just taking all the rubble that's around, and they're rebuilding the walls. And so it's during the time of Nehemiah 2:17 to 18. So then I said to them, you see the bad situation you're in. This is Jerusalem. This is Nehemiah talking. Jerusalem is desolate. Gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also at the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hand to the good work. And so Nehemiah and his men, they rebuilt. It's a fascinating story. I mean, basically, who built what certain parts of the wall? You built the part of the wall in front of your house, okay? And so if you're building the wall in front of your house, guess what? You're going to make sure it's built as good as possible. I want to come in somewhere else. I'm going to build this as high and as strong as I possibly can. It motivated people. They worked hard. They built hard. They built carefully on that, okay? Nehemiah. So 444, and then we go all the way past the Old Testament. We go to a New Testament Jerusalem. I'm just going to start this because we don't have enough time to finish this. We're going to start. I don't know. Is this map in your thing? There's a map of Jerusalem in your thing. Page 40. Okay. So this is the first century Jerusalem. Who's the world power at this time? Rome. Rome's the world power at this time. Now you look here. Now remember I showed you the city of David, the Ophel. Now look at this. What in the world is this? What is this? It's the Temple Mount, but it's been massively expanded by Herod the Great. From 36 BC to about 4 BC, Herod the Great builds a Temple Mount. But what he does, he wants it to be a lot bigger, so what do you have to do? It's the top of a mountain, so you have to raise it up. In a sense, he makes the whole thing a terrace. He raises it up and shaves off the top so that it's massively expanded. So the Temple Mount during the time of Christ would have been significantly larger than the Temple Mount during Hezekiah's time, even during Solomon's time. It was significantly greater than that. And we're going to look at that more in detail when we look at the temple itself. But you can see how it's a defensibility. You can see here the hills. Here's the Kidron Valley again. Here's the upper city. This is where, people lived. It was the common place people lived. This is where the upper room, many people believe, would be in that area. And there's various bridges and arches and things that they had. Here's another picture. Jerusalem in the time of Christ. You can see the Temple Mount. It dominates the city percentage-wise. It's massive. And the temple itself dominates that. Here's the city of David. It is. Here's the Siloam Pool. Here's Hezekiah's tunnel. It's still there, right? See, you asked your question, Gus. Here's the Gihon Springs outside the wall because you really couldn't do that. But then it's brought inside the wall. Siloam. There's miracles, right? Christ does miracles at the Pool of Siloam. That's where it was. That's what the Hezekiah's tunnel ended. It ends in the Pool of Siloam. That's where it ends. And so that's a very natural place for Christ to do miracles. Go ahead, Becky.
Is the city of David basically the old city today?
Is the city of David the old city today? Not exactly. Somewhat, but not exactly. It's not exactly because the question was, is the city of David the exact same thing? Oh, I'm sorry. The city of David? No, not at all. The old city would go outside here. The old city is not the city of David at all today. It's very, very different than the city of David. Because it was rebuilt during, remember, there's going to be 2,000 years of fighting and walls built and walls torn down. We have the Turks, the Ottomans, the Crusaders. I mean, there's all kinds of walls that are going to be built and torn down. The walls that you look at from today, like on the old city, they were not during their time at all, because how can you tell? Well, because it was built during the 15th century, 16th century, the ways that they designed, the way weapons could fire with things, they didn't have them at that time. Yeah. Zach.
This might be going back just a little bit, but where would it, like, as far as Sennacherib is concerned, like, where would he have most likely been? Like the rapture cloud comes out and calls out to the people and says they're listening, can you speak in,
Don't speak in their language. I don't want them to understand.
Yeah, don't speak in Indian language, speak in Aramaic. When he's doing that, do you know roughly, like, where would be the best place to attack Jerusalem, I guess?
Well, the best place is from the north, typically. The best place is from the north because, why? Because you have the valleys, you have the different valleys, so the best place probably is from the north. We don't know the siege camps that they had. We do know that when the Romans conquered Masada, we do know where those were. We don't know, because that was so long ago, we don't know. Most sense would be from the north. Okay? Well, I'm going to tie it up there, and we'll come back. We'll pick up here at first century Jerusalem, and we'll look through some of the things in Jerusalem, and then we'll look at the temple, the tabernacle, and then the temple for next week. So I trust this gives you an understanding. This is real. This is a real place. And what was Jerusalem like when David was there? What was Jerusalem like when Hezekiah was there? What was Jerusalem like when Christ was there? But you're thinking about that. Okay? Let me pray. Father, thank you for this. We can understand your word. Pray that we would live in light of the glorious truths that you have blessed us with. These are real people, real places, but ultimately they trusted you. And if they trusted you, you blessed. Thank you, Lord. In your name, amen.